Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Peachy from your WCA Human Anatomy and Physiology class. And I'm going to be doing a series of supplemental videos for class to kind of fill in the gaps from week to week so that, if we have a lesson and there's a lot of information that's covered between one week and the next, you're not missing kind of key information. So I wanted to start off here with looking at the body structure and organization. We're going to do the intro to the integumentary system. Actually, we're going to do the integumentary system in our first virtual class next week. So the body structure and organization, this comes in handy especially when just trying to orient yourself and to communicate stuff within the human body. If you are at all considering a career in the health field, these are the common terms that are used across the health field to be able to describe, something like where a person is hurt or, where a body organ would be in the human body. First of all, before we kind of look at the anatomical kind of orientation, let's look at kind of the organization of the body itself. Oops. I actually meant to try to click and drag my picture, but this has been doing kind of glitchy lately and not letting me do that as readily as I used to be able to. So here we have kind of the organizational levels that you start off with the simplest, which is that everything's made up of atoms, right? And those atoms form molecules, which then comprise cells. Within your body, you have specialized cells that work together to make up tissues, and you'll have multiple tissues within a single organ, and those organs actually work in conjunction with each other to perform like multiple functions that are all related. Like, for example, with your digestive system, you've got digestive system organs whose primary function is to digest and food and absorb nutrients and get rid of waste. But then you also have what are called accessory organs in that system, that they play a partial role in the digestive system, but maybe they have a role in another body system too. And then all of the organ systems in your body make up the organism, which in this case is the human. So that's kind of the arrangement. If you go from smallest to biggest, that's like your spectrum of organization. And then we have that picture in the front, and that's called the anatomical position. So whenever we're describing locations where something is, we're using the anatomical position as reference. It's a person standing up straight, their arms relaxed at their sides with their palms facing forward. It's very important that we all have like a primary starting position, so that when we're talking about front and back, and things like that, although we don't use the words front and back, that we all have the same starting position, right? Because what do you mean? The palm is on the front, according to the anatomical position, although many of us might stand like this and think this is the front, right? So this is actually considered to be the anterior side, according to that anatomical position. Super important that everybody has that same reference point so that communication across the board is the same, right? You wouldn't want one doctor to say one thing and another doctor to say a different thing and then somebody to get mixed up and amputate the wrong leg. We all hear about those horror stories. So then we see, and we look at what are called body cavities. And the body is essentially made up of all these hollow spaces inside that house different organs. And those body cavities contain, they're separated from each other by membranes. And in some cases, actually even muscles, even like fibrous kind of cartilaginous dividers. We'll talk about those a little bit later. So our main body cavities, well, the largest one is the dorsal body cavity, right? And then we have the ventral body cavity. So we can look at it from different reference points. That's the back side. And then the ventral would be kind of that front side there, right? So the dorsal is made up of your backside. That is just your cranial cavity and the vertebral cavity here. So you've got the space inside your head where your brain is, and then you've got the space inside your spine where your spinal cord and cerebral spinal fluid and other nerves and stuff like that connect to. So that's two different body cavities on the back side of you. I think of dorsal. Think about if I had if I was a shark or something, that would be where my dorsal fin is, right? So dorsal, kind of weird, but that's a good way to think of it. And ventral being your front side, and then your front side is made up of, again, you also have the cranial cavity. It can be divided into the fore and the, posterior part and the anterior part. So we have your thoracic cavity, which is where your heart and lungs and stuff are. And then we've got your abdominal cavity. We've got your pelvic cavity. So all three of those, which house the majority of all your internal organs, are found in that ventral body cavity. Then we have directional terms. And anybody who knows me knows that I am exceptionally directionally challenged. So some of these things I have to think about really, really, really hard to be able to make sure I'm using the correct terms. So that's also another reason to have standardized terms across the board, right? So we see here we have, again, we have a reference point. So in this particular view here, when we see the lateral view, when we're looking at the side of a body, we have the reference point in the middle here. Anything that is from this midpoint towards the head is cranial in direction. Anything from this midpoint down towards the feet is caudal in direction. Caudal actually refers to tail. So if you know anything, like the tail fin of a fish is called the caudal fin of a fish. From this midpoint, if you're going towards the front, it's anterior or ventral. We used the word ventral before. And from towards the back, it's posterior or dorsal. Okay, so that's from the side view. If you're looking from the front view, again, your medial point, right? You're going to use the midline of the body as kind of your midpoint. If it's toward the midline of the body, it's called medial. If it's moving away from the midline of the body, it's called lateral. If you pick a point on the arm, for example, the elbow, if it's moving towards the shoulder, we call it proximal. If it's going towards the wrist and hand, we call it distal. And same thing with the leg, right? If it's moving towards the top of the leg, it's proximal. If it's moving away, it's called distal. So that comes in handy when we're looking at different parts. Maybe one of the two parts is a little closer to the top of the leg and one is a little closer to the bottom of the leg. So the one closer to the top we'll call the proximal part, and the part closest to the bottom we'll call the distal part. If you're looking at the femur, for example, the top of the femur versus the bottom, the proximal end, the distal end of the femur. Okay, kind of gives you those directional terms. So again, just more pictures, kind of getting and understanding those body planes here. So here are some examples of how they're used. For example, dorsal. The backbone is dorsal to the belly. So the backbone is closer to the back of your body than your belly is, so it's dorsal to it. Or we could say posterior in that case, right? Let's see here. The ankle is distal to the knee, so that's kind of another example. The ankle is closer to your foot, and the knee is closer to your thigh. So the ankle is distal to the knee. So those are ways in which those terms are used. So just become more familiar with kind of those terms. Those are directional terms. Those allow us to describe relative positions, right? So that I know when I'm doing something, where it is in relation to other things in the body. And that's important, okay? If I'm communicating something, for example, the location of a tumor, I might say, well, it's the tumor is distal to the elbow, meaning that it's, on this side of the arm and not up here. So it kind of gives some relative location. And then we have body planes. You can divide the body in different ways. You can divide it right down the midline, which is called the sagittal plane. You can divide it from front to back. So that's the frontal plane, and you can divide it right down the middle. Cut yourself in half from top to bottom. That's the transverse plane. So there's different ways in which you can look at, the different halves of the human body as well. And then, of course, we've got all these more specific body regions. If the other ones were more relative terms, just kind of describing where something is in relationship to something else, these are very specific. So we have very specific regions of the human body. The abdominal area is called umbilical. For example, you can get what's called an umbilical hernia, which just is a hernia that's found in the abdominal area. And a hernia is an area where your muscles are separated in some cases or just weaker. And what happens is you get a protrusion where the internal contents of the stomach kind of protrude through the muscles and create up a little pouch or like a little bulge in there, which can be painful. But ultimately, the issue is if it gets strangulated, then sometimes like your intestines can get strangulated within that hernia, and it can cause all sorts of troubles. It can actually be an emergency at that point. All right, when you're referring to the head, it's the head is the cephalic area, or cephalic. So that's part of our head, and then the neck is cervical. And then if you look at the back, for example, you've got a whole bunch of different areas of the back as well. You've got the cervical, but then you've also got kind of these dorsal back areas that are subdivided. On the front, your chest is your thoracic. So you have abdominal and pelvic. Remember, those are just like the cavities, right? And every one of them can be subdivided as well. And then you've got the different body regions of the limbs, the arms and legs as well. Okay? So I don't expect you to memorize all these, but I do think that as you kind of start reading through all of your curriculum, all the lessons, you guys will become more familiar with these terms. Some of them you're going to know already. You're probably going to know that maybe oral would be mouth, right? Nasal would be nose. Those are things you might know. Some of them you might not know. Maybe you didn't know that orbital refers to the eyes. But the eye sockets are called the orbits. So, maybe that's something that's a little bit helps you to remember. The otic refers to the ears. The occipital, the back of the head, right? The lumbar is the lower back. Okay, so some of these are going to be somewhat familiar. The pedal refers to your foot. Kind of looks like the word, it's the word pedal essentially, so you can think of pedaling a bike with your feet. So just kind of get yourself familiar with these specific body regions, okay? And that's pretty much it for this one, guys. Just want you to understand the different body regions and familiarize yourself with them. And the more you kind of play with this, the more you kind of use these terms, the more familiar they're going to be. And you guys will hopefully, be more fluent in this kind of medical language by the end of the semester. Have a great rest of the day, everybody, and let me know if you have any questions.